I think the signal there was that he's still willing to have these discussions and to see what the United States might offer.
Nor did we see any willingness on the part of the North to take steps beyond the ones they've already taken.
They have an incentive to put a positive spin on what North Korea says to get the ball rolling forward on denuclearization talks.
There was very little permanent harm done to the North Korean nuclear program. All of those steps are essentially reversible.
So do you think the United States will actually sign that declaration?
I'm worried, very worried about that. I think that maybe the U.S. side underestimates the political significance of the declaration ending the war.
From the Voice of America, this is Washington Talk.
Hello and welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Eun-Jung Cho. South Korea sent a special delegation to the North to help reinvigorate the stalled denuclearization talks. But North Korean leader Kim Jong-un only reiterated his previous position, that he is willing to denuclearize, but it is the U.S.'s turn to make a concession and sign the end-of-war declaration. Today, we will discuss the results of the South Korean delegation's trip to Pyongyang. Andrew Yeo at the Catholic University of America. Professor Yeo is also the director of the Asian Studies programs there. Also joining us today, Mr. Frank Januzzi, president of the Mansfield Foundation and former advisor to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Welcome to the program.
Good to be here.
Thank you for having us.
Chairman Kim said that he wants to denuclearize during President Trump's first term in office, but National Security Advisor John Bolton recently said that Chairman Kim told President Moon of South Korea when they met at Panmunjom for the Inter-Korean Summit that he will denuclearize within 1 year. So is now North Korea backtracking on its commitment?
I think it's hard to backtrack from a commitment that was never really made. The North Koreans have repeatedly said that they aspire to live on a nuclear-free Korean peninsula. They want a denuclearized North and South Korea, but they've been very vague about timelines, about what denuclearization really means. And so I don't see this as backtracking so much as the North still refusing to be pinned down, either on a timeline or on the really difficult first concrete steps toward denuclearization. And it's pretty clear that they now think they've done enough of the preliminaries, and it's the U.S. turn to move next.
Andrew?
Right. I almost believed it was Bolton's interpretation that perhaps the North Koreans would denuclearize within 1 year, and it seems almost nonsensical to believe that. So they haven't really backtracked if that commitment wasn't made. I think North Korea still wants to engage, wants to discuss denuclearization, so they haven't backtracked on that end. I think what is of concern is whether it goes back to this idea of whether North Korea is serious or not about really giving up its nuclear weapons.
So just to clarify what Ambassador Bolton said, that 1 year mark, that was what South Korean officials told Ambassador Bolton. So is South Korea sugarcoating North Korea's messages and exaggerating North Korea's intentions, do you think?
They have an incentive to put a positive spin on what North Korea says to get the ball rolling forward on denuclearization talks. But I don't know, because we weren't privy to those discussions, and it's more of a he said, she said, and we're getting the information from the U.S. side that this is what the South Koreans say. So I can't really speak for that, but I do know that for the South Korean government, they would want to put North Korea's message in a more positive light to the United States.
Yeah, if we're not in the room, we really can't decide, who's telling the truth or spinning the truth. I think the North Koreans probably did indicate to the South, hey, look, once we make a decision, we could do it quickly. And the South Koreans probably took that message and brought it back to America saying, good news, the North Koreans could denuclearize in 1 year. But I don't think that was ever a concrete plan, and most of the technical experts that I know who have studied the problem in detail, like Dr. Siegfried Hecker from Los Alamos Nuclear Laboratories, they believe that even if the North Koreans are cooperating fully, denuclearization is a multi-year effort, 5, 6, 10 years to go from where we are today to a denuclearized Korean peninsula.
Yeah, I think that's an issue of a long debate, so we'll move on. But Chairman Kim's latest comments, did he indicate anything that he will go closer to the CVID, the US's goal?
I don't think so. When the statement that I saw from the National Security Council Chairman, Chung Eui-young, it didn't seem that he was making any more concrete steps. I think the signal there was that he's still willing to have these discussions and to see what what the United States might offer, but there wasn't anything more concrete, in my opinion.
I think there was, as Andrew said, there was this reaffirmation that yes, the North has not abandoned the goal of denuclearization, and they still have faith in President Trump and his commitment. But no, I don't think we got much closer to a real definition, nor did we see any willingness on the part of the North to take steps beyond the ones they've already taken in terms of the missile freeze and the nuclear test freeze, the tunnel demolition at Pyongyang. Beyond those modest steps, I think the North is now waiting for the U.S. to make the next move.
So those steps that you just mentioned, Frank, Chairman Kim complained that those steps are underappreciated. But in everybody's eyes, that didn't do anything to limit North Korea's ability, right?
I think there was very little permanent harm done to the North Korean nuclear program from all of those steps. All of those steps are essentially reversible. None of them prevent the North from producing fissile material or producing more nuclear weapons. On the other hand, I don't want to try to say that those steps were meaningless. Every month that goes by where North Korea doesn't test a missile or a bomb is a good month. And it delays somewhat the advancement of their program.
Chairman Kim said he will take more active steps if the United States takes reciprocal steps, meaning sign the end of war declaration. So do you think the United States will actually sign that declaration just because North Korea is pressuring the United States to do it?
Well, I've said that there's still room for negotiation between the United States and North Korea about this declaration to end the war and also seeing more tangible steps made by North Korea on denuclearization. I don't know if this is still a sequencing issue and something that has to be discussed. But from what I'd heard, or at least reportedly, Secretary of State Pompeo was willing, or he was in these discussions before he decided not to take the trip. So there is some wiggle room, there's some negotiating room.
The solution may be some kind of synchronicity, some form of a declaration simultaneous with some new additional concrete steps by the North toward denuclearization. I think diplomats might be able to find that common ground, but not easily. It's going to be very difficult to find that common ground.
Don't we have concerns that North Korea will just get what it wants, the end of war declaration, and then not hold up on its end of the bargain of, doing more on denuclearization?
Well, I'm worried, very worried about that. I think that maybe the U.S. side underestimates the political significance of a declaration ending the war. That would be a big win for Kim Jong-un. He could go back to his own people and say, look, I've done something my father and my grandfather could not do. I've ended the war on our terms. As a nuclear power, with the Americans and the South Koreans and the Chinese recognizing the legitimacy of our government and the end of the war. And it would be very hard for the United States after such a declaration to generate any international enthusiasm to reinstall harsh coercive measures on the North if they fail to denuclearize. So I hope the U.S. side is not underappreciating just how significant an end-of-war declaration might be.
Maybe significant, but at the same time, I think it's one step. It's not a peace treaty, which is at a different level. I think the end-of-war declaration is more of a political gesture. So I may disagree here with Frank about the significance of this declaration. I think it's more of a sign to show that the United States is willing to move forward. This is something that the South Koreans want very much as well. So again, it is a declaration, but it's not a final peace treaty. I think the peace treaty, again, is just at a different level, and I don't foresee the United States signing that at all until we see complete denuclearization on the part of North Korea.
Well, on the positive side, I mean, the declaration would strip the North of any excuse to maintain their nuclear weapons program. If the hostility is removed, then the justification for that program evaporates.
Which is why I'm not opposed to if the U.S. were to put forth some sort of declaration.
As Andrew has just said, South Korea really wants this too. So the talking points, South Korea and North Korea have same talking points when it comes to end of war declaration, saying that this will not weaken the U.S.-Korea alliance, that it doesn't mean the pullout of the U.S. troops. So how does United States feel about how South Korea is positioning itself between United States and North Korea?
South Korea since early this year, really since January, has played this broker between North Korea and the United States. I mean, that's how we got to, one of the reasons of how we got to the June 12th Singapore summit. So they've been playing this middle role. There are some questions of whether South Korea is being played by the North Koreans, they're being had, but for the US, I mean, I think that they recognize South Korea has a significant interest at stake because it has to do with their own security. Inter-Korea relations is very important. So the US is not opposed to having this inter-Korea summit. At the same time, I think the US is worried, though, that perhaps the Moon government may move ahead of the US. And this is where even if the focus is mostly on inter-Korea dialogue, there might be concessions made that would walk back or challenge some of the sanctions that are in place by the US, which the US still wants to keep and enforce.
Last question before we go, I want both your opinions. So the upcoming round of inter-Korean summit, do you expect anything substantial in moving forward the denuclearization process?
No, I don't. Not on denuclearization, but I think there will be progress on other maybe conventional security issues, and those would be most welcome, whether it's the West Sea or the DMZ and respect for the armistice. And I think we'll also see some progress on North-South political ties and the establishment of the liaison offices. So all of that is very fruitful, but it will not necessarily do much on the denuclearization issue.
Right. I think it's going to help continue to reduce tensions between the two Koreas. And the Moon government, if they can bring up denuclearization, if they can somehow convince Kim Jong-un that you need to make more tangible steps, then we can try to see, we being the South Koreans, if we can try to get the United States to give some kind of concession on the declaration, then we might see some significant progress. But again, I'm a little bit more skeptical whether Kim Jong-un wants to talk about denuclearization at this upcoming summit.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un seems to want to talk with the United States when it comes to denuclearization. We'll end it here and watch video for our next topic.
With North Korea, we'll have to see. I think part of the North Korean problem is caused by our trade disputes with China.
Far out front of the international community on normalization with North Korea. For all of the efforts over the last 9 months for Kim Jong-un to sort of normalize his dialogue channels with China, South Korea, and the United States, we're still talking about a country that is under severe UN sanction, still pursuing nuclear weapons, still really a pariah state in many ways. And I think Xi Jinping doesn't want to lend his credibility directly to that leader at this time.
Andrew, does this decision have anything to do with the ongoing trade war between the United States and China?
I don't think so. In my opinion, I think China is just looking after its own interests and looking at the timing of the inter-Korea summits and the international negotiations, or hopeful negotiations that might take place. And as Frank says, I think it's just biding its time. It doesn't really have anything directly to do with the trade wars between the US and China.
President Trump many times said that China is behind North Korea not being so cooperative in denuclearization. So was President Xi concerned that if he goes to Pyongyang this time, this may upset President Trump even more?
I think he's really thinking about China's own role in Northeast Asia. And he might be compartmentalizing the issue between trade and North Korea. That's not how the U.S. is doing it, or at least Trump. He's trying to link the two things, but I'm not sure that's the strategy that China is taking.
I think Andrew's onto something here, because that idea that the Chinese could compartmentalize their cooperation with the United States and North Korea and keep it pretty separate from the trade tension between the U.S. and China, that's very credible to me. The Chinese bureaucracy, the Chinese government is pretty good at compartmentalization, but I'm not sure that the reverse is true. I think Xi Jinping is perfectly capable of separating those issues.
Now, Mr. Lee is the most senior Chinese official to visit North Korea since Kim Jong-un assumed power. So what can we read from this?
Well, I do think that the Chinese have been steadily improving their relations with North Korea over the last 9 months. Really since the tensions reached a high point just at the turn of the year. And so the Chinese, on the one hand, are looking for economic, political, and security influence over the North, and they are affirming their special relationship. But on the other hand, they're holding back just a little bit because of their frustration with the North's nuclear program and their desire to demonstrate to the world that they are willing to still be a team player and keep some pressure. So it's a balancing act.
Right. I don't think Xi Jinping wants to be seen sitting right next to Kim Jong-un at this event, but by sending Lee, it does send a message to the world that we are still supporting, or we're a benefactor of North Korea.
Right, Andrew, we're in this stalemate in denuclearization talks. So is there any constructive role that Mr. Lee can play while he's in Pyongyang?
He's there really to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the founding of the North Korean state. So I don't think he's really going to spend a lot of time talking about denuclearization. It may come up, but I don't really have that expectation for China to play some kind of brokering role here to get negotiations jump-started again.
It's hard to know, but I have a slightly different spin on it. I mean, I think it's possible that Lee may have some pretty intense, quiet, high-level talks during his visit. And I think the Chinese have an appreciation that Donald Trump is under a lot of heat here in Washington, that everything could change after November, and that if the North Koreans don't lock in some progress between now and the beginning of the year, the next year, things could get really difficult really quickly. So while Andrew may well be right about the real purpose of this visit is more bilateral, I think there's also the possibility that the Chinese will really lean on the North and say, look, trust us, we understand American politics, you have 4 months to make progress.
Last question. So is denuclearization high on China's agenda when it comes to the Korean Peninsula?
Well, it's below stability, but it's probably second after
Andrew?
stability.
Yeah, China certainly does not want to see a nuclear North Korea because that actually contributes to instability. But then I think China wants to reap other benefits that they can. For instance, the U.S. presence on the Korean Peninsula, that might be something that you can link to denuclearization. So they do care about it, but in terms of the sequencing of orders, and for now they can live, I think, with a nuclear North Korea, but they don't want this to be a permanent state.
Well, we'll end it here and move on to our next segment. Now time for the photo moment, time to look at an interesting North Korea picture. Today we have a photo of an ice cream that is made after the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. A Chinese ice cream maker developed this product named Jinsampang, a nickname Chinese people call Chairman Kim. Andrew?
It's kind of goofy, and I'm concerned how North Koreans would take a popsicle. It does really look funny, so I have to admit. But
The hair has got a Trump quality to it.
yeah, actually I didn't notice.
It's more of a
that.
hybrid. It could be a little bit
it
of
looks more like South Korean singer Psy.
Psy. Yeah.
It is quite funny eating a popsicle of Kim Jong-un, but yeah,
you won't
I think
see those
Trump,
on the streets of
I think
Pyongyang.
I think Frank's really astute here, though. The hair is this a fusion of Kim Jong-un with the Trump hairstyle, portending maybe another meeting? Who knows?
Frank, you want to add?
Oh, I think Andrew said it all. I want to know who has the franchise rights for this in the United States.
A Chinese maker. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Frank, Andrew, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And this was Washington Talk from the Voice of America, and I'm Eunjang Cho. Thank you for watching.